Greetings, friends. You are on the Military Reports channel, and today we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine on the 26th of April, 2024 year. A lot of things have happened today, so let's get started. And we will start with you with the loudest, most interesting direction. This is, of course, the Okerchensk bird direction. Let's call it that. As you can see, there are a large number of geolocations, a large number of icons, a large number of posts, and each one means something. Today, a large amount of information was received during the day, and in general, basically all the posts, all the information is. If everything is summed up like this, it boils down to the fact that the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to develop an offensive, continue to develop a bridgehead around the city. But so far without any, let's say, explicit geolocations, who can confirm this. Here is an approximate post that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have established control over the southern part. Let's say over the southwestern part of the settlement. A little further on, we see with you information is being received that the armed forces of the Russian Federation have established control, let's say, over the completely populated locality of Pristina, and, among other things, Russian fighters managed to enter the so-called gardens. Let's say such an area, a small area. Here is this area, which is located between the settlement of Arkhangelsk and Osheretyn itself. And cartographers also confirm this information separately. And in general, if we summarize everything with you and sum up everything with you to some kind of, let's say, logical analysis, then in general this is the picture. This is the picture that most cartographers are currently drawing, who are only dealing with the situation for a specially military operation. Quite significant progress, significant progress. There are several posts, which are several, let's say even Telegram channels. Several sources that claim that the armed forces of the Russian Federation, including yours of the settlement of Arkhangelsk, but most likely this information does not correspond to reality. Next, it is worth paying attention to the information, posts that come from the settlement of Novokalinov ceramics. There are also cartographers, including a pro-Ukrainian diptate, who assures that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to break through and cut Persherev-Neva Street during offensive operations, and enter, let's say, a building and, let's say, a private building that is already located north of this street. If we summarize in general all the information that comes from pro-Ukrainian sources, then we can observe with you approximately this picture in, let's say, the east of the Novokalinov ceramics. And if, on the whole, we try to extend the offensive vector, then let's say that we clearly see that the armed forces of the Russian Federation are really trying to enter the locality of Arkhangelsk along the Osheretyn line. And if we are talking with you about Novokalinov ceramics, then there is most likely a desire to move as far as possible to a small river, a small, let's say, lake or a reservoir there. It is possible to overcome it slightly, if possible, and also move towards, let's say, that grouping of the Russian army that is moving along the line of the line and Arkhangelsk. It is unlikely that it will be possible to create a cauldron for Ukrainian troops here, but in general, such an advance will certainly lead sooner or later to the fact that the entire AFU grouping, which is currently concentrated in the fields in Arkhangelsk and Novokalinov ceramics, will be forced to begin retreating in the north, naturally, towards the settlement of Kalinova. It will surely be another flight, another surrender of positions, another large number of videos about the movement of Ukrainian fighters across the fields under some kind of artillery or cluster bombardment. But on the other hand, again, you should not be so sure. Of course, there is an extremely high probability that due to disorganization, let's say, due to loss of orientation, with communication problems, there is an extremely high probability that the Ukrainian armed forces fighters will not have time to retreat to the north and the cauldron will close over them. It is difficult to say how many personnel are currently present in this, say, two settlements. But for sure there are possible presences in the area of 1,000. Maybe 200, 300, maybe 400, maybe the whole 1,000. Well, no more. Maybe even less than 1,000. But in general, in any case, it can be quite a significant victory, and, of course, also, which can break the spirit of the fighters in the USU in this direction. Then we are moving with you to Novobakhmutovka and Solovyev. According to Novobakhmutovka, no geolocations are published anymore, the frames are not published. Everyone in general understands that most likely. Well, they don't understand. There were already shots confirming full control. And today, a large number of Solovyev's articles have been published. Some sources will publish footage of the hoisting of the Russian flag on the eastern outskirts, that is, a small advance. As you can see, the Russian flag is flying over a semi-destroyed building. That is, to some extent, this confirms at least control over the northeastern part of the village. And there was also published separately footage of a fighter against the background of a building that was not gelated. It was just an icon and became a marker on the map put so accidentally, randomly. But the only thing that the author claims is that the shooting is also conducted by Solovyev, that the settlement is under full control. And in particular, most cartographers have already updated their maps based on these geolocations. From the real geolocation, which shows some kind of advance of the Russian army to the western outskirts of the village of Solovyev. There is only one published by the 100th Mechanized Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which was hastily transferred to the direction. And in these frames, according to the author of this video, the blow was struck at the bus station where the Russian fighters were. And, I repeat once again, for, say, as a fire brigade, the forces of the Honeycomb were transferred here. This is the former 100th Territorial Defense Brigade. However, this is, let's say, the first case in the history of Ukraine when a brigade from Territorial Defense was transferred to a mechanized brigade, apparently to theirs. But again, sources report, that they have not yet been fully rearmed, and, in general, it still remains the old territorial defense, but which they tried to use to stabilize the situation in the direction. But, as we see, it was not quite possible. Then we go with you south of, let's say, Solovyev Novobakhmutovka, and here it is very important to remind you once again about the presence of water barriers that Solovyev then goes to Novopokrovskaya, goes to Novoselovka first. Dissects. 2 plots have been cut off for new settlers, and this is a beam of Vovch. The beam of the routine. Yes, it flows further into the river Vovcha, which then goes through Mazova and flows safely into the Charles Reservoir. In other words, this is the first such small barrier, a water barrier. And we have a similar story going down the river. The river is bad. Here it goes through Berdichi, then Semenovka, after Semenovka Orlovka, Orlovka, after Orlovka, it goes further to Umansko. Divides Tumansko into 2 parts, after Uman Kesnobrodovka, and already also flows into the Karlav Reservoir. In other words, we see here a certain outline of a small package of an artillery pocket, a bag, convenient perhaps. Defense positions, where a huge number of personnel of the armed forces of Ukraine are currently concentrated. And here it is worth understanding what is happening here and what will happen next. So I will tell you that due to the fact that the Russian army as a whole has established control over the settlement of Solovyev, at the moment we can say that a fairly significant boiler has begun to form, and either there, say, the Afu grouping is located here. It got into a very unpleasant situation in the form of a small operational environment. Or it did not. Let's just say it's not a very comfortable situation when the supply and rotation and the delivery of the bull reinforcement is quite complicated. We're going to find out and understand what's going on here. Let's get back to geolocation for now. Solovyev and I have sorted it out. Here again, there are maps from various pro-Ukrainian sources, neutral ones. that at least the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to develop a bridgehead south of Novobakhmutovka and Solovyev. And in fact, they have already reached the fields to Burdik from the north, and also published footage of information that the AFU began a hasty retreat from the fields between Burdik's Novobakhmutovka in the direction of, say, Novoselovka first. And in general, as it were, this offensive is still more or less. Since the geolocation of strikes does not arrive, it was probably carried out somehow more or less centrally and successfully. And already pro-Russian sources indicate that after the retreat, this whole area, all these post-painted over terrain, painted over fields, were completely captured by Russian fighters. There is also a video from Semenovka. Here we can see with you the shots of the flag's armament, also in the central part. Here is a Russian fighter in a fairly calm rhythm, without any risks, without any excitement, tremor, and so on and so forth. Hoisting a Russian flag over another building, in general, which also indicates control over this area. In other words, Burdik, Semenovka, all these settlements have already been cleared. There may be some part of Burdik under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, but in general. Now, as we discussed in previous videos, the Ukrainian units are trying to roll back to Novopokrovsky, and then go along the small road 0542 Novoselovka first, Semenovka, and south to Uman, to this stronghold, which have yet to be built. Well, somewhere in that year, a large-scale offensive on Avdiivka was not conducted there yet. That is, somewhere here. But there are several points here that are worth discussing, so that they generally understand what kind of situation the fighters in the USU are in now, who have essentially fallen into this artillery pocket. And here it's not just that it's a convenient position for firing with artillery, drones, bombs, everything that the Russian army has in service. If in principle, I think over these weeks, but if necessary, they will dig up a large number of trenches and will sit in them. Hide. The most important thing here is, of course, the supply. The supply of this artillery pocket. If we look at the map, then this artillery, say, pocket, this bag, could have been supplied in the forest before, or until today, or in general as a whole, with several roads. Here comes one desired 0542, Novoselovka the first. Then the crossing of the Vovcha River, and, let's say, entering the southern part of the settlement. Firm where supplies could be redistributed further between the units in the pocket. The next possibility, of course, we have again through the same desirable, through the railway, let's say, the railway, Novozelenaya, Kamish, Kamashevka, then, let's say, through a network of strong points we cross and get into the same Mazovo. And there could also be some kind of maybe, or there could be some that. There will be a redistribution of, say, resources between departments. Well, of course, one of the main and important supply opportunities also goes through the Charles Reservoir, Yasnobrodovka, through Snobrodovka to Umanskoy. However, there are a few points, a few nuances that are worth paying attention to. For example, footage of the Russian army artillery striking Krasnopol was published today. Or it may be a rocket on the bridge that goes from Kamashevka to Mazova. Here, of course, is not the Dnieper River. Here is a swampy area, and here there is a transition from a swampy area into a river, into channels. But in general, of course, in connection with, let's say, the destruction of this bridge. But I can't give a 100% probability of what state the supply is now exactly across the Vovchi River in this direction. But for sure the supply here is at times. Perhaps the level of supply, the quality of supply. The supply capabilities have fallen significantly after the destruction of this bridge. Of course, it is possible for an old man to jump over here, yes, to stand on two legs on two banks. But in general, for some reason, the Russian leadership decided to destroy this bridge. And for sure the goal was not just to discuss it later on the Military Reports channel. It's unequivocal. Next. In other words, this bridge was destroyed literally 2 days ago because geolocation appeared here. I remind you that back in April, we received information that, among other things, the armed forces of the Russian Federation destroyed a bridge running across the Umanskaya River. That is, either not even a bridge, most likely. This is the bridge, yes, this is the bridge. And it was also destroyed with the use of either a rocket, or it was unwound by Krasnopol. And generally based on. Here is a destroyed bridge for you, and in general, for sure, including this, it did not affect, let's say, the rotation of the supply movement of infantry units. However, if we talk about technology, at the moment there is an extremely low probability that it is possible to use it. In other words, you and I can sum up all these points, come to the conclusion that this is, say, a bridge. This is part of the supply capacity cutoff, or its capacity is reduced as much as possible through the Umansko supply cutoff. At the moment, we have no information about the situation in the area of Novoselovka 1. However, proceeding from and, let's say, reasoning logically, we can conclude that if the Mazova boring, Kamyshinka, Umanskaya crossing is destroyed, then there is an extremely high probability that either the crossing on Novoselovka first has already been destroyed, or its destruction is about to happen. After that, of course, the supply and maintenance, let's say, of the viability of the AFU groups of fighters located in this pocket will decrease to a minimum level. And then there will be a choice. Either give up or fight, or try to somehow get out of this difficult situation. But however, there will be no choice here that it will be possible to heroically defend this, say, a small pocket, fight off Russian troops, and, plus, counterattack. In other words, in general, everything is clear here for this pocket there. In the near future, the Russian army, due to such, let's say, pleasant weather conditions, I'm talking about destroyed bridges. Everything is developing as positively as possible, retreating and again. Based on the fact that Ukraine has changed tactics in general, in particular, it seeks to preserve personnel. There is an extremely high probability that this pocket will be cleaned up perhaps even in a few days, since it will be very extremely difficult to hold on here due to the lack of supplies and so on and so forth. Then we move with you to the south. Again, we see a counter-battery struggle, attempts to throw something, throw it, let it down, all this is monitored. Destroyed with the use of Lancets, drones. That is, in general, counter-battery fighting at short distances is also being conducted. Then we are moving with you to Krasnogorsk, firm where very important, very interesting information also comes. The Russian army continues its offensive, and today the most important news comes from the area between, say, the Krasnogorsk industrial zone and the zone of eastern skyscrapers, and an extensive network of strongpoints, trenches and trenches. And according to most cartographers, while we did not have geolocation confirming this, the Russian troops managed to advance in this direction and establish approximately such control over the terrain. In other words, there are posts, that is, information was published that the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to get to, let's say, the Great Alliance gas station. Right here. In other words, control was established here, and after that, cartographers began updating maps separately, confirming the information. And it turns out that we see with you as a whole, the vector of the Russian army's offensive is going north, crossing Central Street, and including, most likely, reaching Central Street. A separate unit of the Russian army will probably try to turn west, in order to cut, and generally cut off the industrial zone brick in a refractory plant from supply, and either force the APU fighters to retreat, or take them into the encirclement as well. However, this is not the most important news with the direction. The most important news is the information coming, let's say, from the northeastern direction. Separate cartographers, separate posts. Just before the start of the video, information was received that the 110th Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation broke through the defense of the Afu on the northeastern outskirts, Minich's house was taken under control, including a network of strong points around it. Here, according to the understanding of Dom Minich, that is, if we sum up everything that we have received, approximately this control, this territory is currently under the full control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. In other words, this is no longer just some kind of tactical maneuvers for cutting, moving, bypassing, crossing, bouncing, jumping. This is a specific disaster in the Krasnogorsk direction, and, in my opinion, this is a record. In my opinion, Krasnogorka is becoming a record holder for the number of days of resistance, in the sense that the minimum number of days the Apu could, or in general, in any declension about any case, any time. This word can hold this locality, because it is unequivocal if the information on Minich's house is confirmed, and if the Russian army is able to push on and move further towards Kabzara. Cabaret on the street. Here is Kabzarian Street, and in general, if you manage to reach this milestone, do not climb into the city. Do not climb into the back row. Here the Lozova River is a wonderful barrier. If you manage to get there or advance in some way like this, somehow get involved as much as it is generally possible, as it was generally done in the locality of Okertina, then Krasnogorovka also falls into the cauldron. Into a terrible cauldron, from which it will surely be extremely difficult to get out. And of course we are in that. One should also expect an attempt by the Russian army to design a boiler from the central part to the west. The data is obtained from the streets to this road, which goes from the western part of Krasnogorskovka to the north to Daknaya Street. Now, if it is possible to carry out these two operations here, and everything in theory goes to what we are discussing with you now, then of course Krasnogorsk falls into the most serious environment, from which Ukrainians are unlikely to be able to get out already. There will be, well, as usual, several options: either give up or stay. Then we are moving with you to the South Donetsk direction, where the front is gradually boiling up. The front is boiling up. Geolocations have appeared again in the Prychestovsky direction. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are clearing the area. Artillery strikes are being carried out on the positions of Ukrainian troops. It's hard to say whether this is artillery training, or whether this is an attempt to disrupt the rotation. It's hard to say. The southern, let's say, harvest, the southern part of the harvest is confirmed by information about the advance of the Russian army, already on the territory of farms. In the most populated locality, the Fabs endlessly arrive in huge numbers. No one here feels sorry for them, does not count them, and in general, there is an extremely high probability that, including in the coming days, hours, if not now, the Russian army will continue its offensive to the north. In order to squeeze out this direction and restore control over the positions that were lost during the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Let's just say there is no news on the Zaporozhye direction. There is a little activity, but in general it does not affect, let's say, the fighting. Very interesting information continues to come to us from the Kherson direction. Here again, shots of strikes and patrons from the Apu on the markets are published. Again, footage is being published of a sweep of a possibly supposed bridgehead, where they plan to land in the forest. Motorboats and passenger inflatable boats have gone again, and they are starting to land troops again. Everything went on a new way, everything rushed. K-markets will be on the front pages again now. Another suicidal huge number of operations, but the markets will be. And in particular, the Russian army has already become more active in the direction. Fabs have been struck again. Goosebumps have flown to settlements adjacent to the Dnieper River, where in fact there is a concentration of you there. There is the insertion of Afu fighters in the boat of departure to the other shore. then in the near future. We should expect a lot of interesting things, including information that Holland and European countries, and in general. There is now a large flow of supplies to Ukraine of pontoon equipment, pontoon machines for the construction of pontoon machines. And of course it is motorboats and so on. Ukrainian sources write that it is possible that in the near future the enemy, that is, some Russian sources write, will try to force the Dnieper and break through the defense lines of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the direction of Novi Kakhovka, Mayachka, Chaplinka. At the moment, a group of Marines is gathering up to 2,000 people in the army. A replenishment of up to 4,000 people arrived at the Kherson direction. The Kakhovka reservoir has become shallow, elements of hydraulic structures and plates are visible at the bottom. It is possible to force the Dnieper in the area of Kakhovka. Also, the APU has prepared a very reinforced defensive line on its side of the coast. Here they will definitely attack in the forest, or simulate an offensive. The task is simple, to delay at least something, at least a drop of something in the Kherson direction, and weaken the potential of the offensive of the Russian army in the Avdiivka and Donetsk directions. Then we are moving with you 4 hours yar. Here is another day, another pause, no activity on Earth. Only the Fabs fly, the Su-25s fly, the Eastern Yar clock is equal. But so far the Russian army does not risk going into an assault, since it is very difficult. This is a small coal mine only in this direction, high rises, fields, a big gap. They are trying to bypass it through the forest. There is certainly progress, but at the moment, there is still not enough progress to take the settlements, this suburb, by storm. There is an extremely high probability that before the May holidays they will not even try to do this, but will continue to inflict fire damage and wait perhaps for rotation. The Seversk direction has become more active again. Massive strikes are being carried out in the disputed area. The ARB C-500 are being used. Powerfully work on the AFU strongholds, say, along the forest strewn, towards the direction of the settlement. This is on the southern flank. On the northern flank, there is a sweep of positions with the use of WAVs. If we increase the number of updates, then in general we see with you how the focus of the Russian army went from the south of the disputed, gradually to the most controversial, to the most populated area, including on the northern flank. Such high activity, of course, first of all tells us that there is an extremely high probability that the next stir of the settlement will begin in the near future. Verkhney-Kamiansky receives a frame of artillery strikes, again with the use of ARB C-500 and other artillery, let's say. Guns on a locality, if they were exactly at a stubborn point located in the eastern outskirts of the locality, which was geolocated that Russian attack aircraft had already taken it, but apparently later were forced to retreat. And including the footage from this street, again, artillery strikes, and most likely in general, we see how exactly the Russian army will plan an assault. You plan to storm Verkhney-Kamianskaya, based on geolocation, promotion, and attempts to storm the village will go along the road. This small appendicitis to enter, at least somewhere to gain a foothold, to have a roof over your head, and of course, this stronghold will be stormed. In case of successful promotion, this will create a good springboard, based on which it is possible to move further. But at the same time, they also published a large number of shots of strikes and drones in Beer on Russian attack aircraft. Fighters who tried to move. In other words, in general, it can also be noted that the APU sees everything and takes some actions. Balogorovka. No news. The only thing that is noted here from the side of the armed forces of the 81st Outlet is that Russian fighters simply massively use, let's say, motorcycle stormtroopers. They work in large numbers on motorcycles. At the moment it is showing, it turns out to be some kind of trend. Perhaps motorcycles will not be used as massively as mopeds. Motorcycles are like patrons, but in general, in terms of mobility, in terms of speed. There is not yet a single type of moving equipment there that can work and, let's say, provide such assistance and such advantages as motorcycles and mopeds on the front line. South Kapinsk direction, no news. The central Kapinsky direction, there is a little activity. In Makievka, the lure was launched. At least geolocation has reached us. It's hard to say what's going on. And in the central Kapinsky direction, yesterday it was reported about work in the Stilmakovsky direction. Today the frames are already being published. In other words, if we compare it with the situation that was here a few days ago. Now it's just a flurry of news, a flurry of updates. Footage of a fiery anomaly is being published in the Kapinsky nodal area. Something was set on fire in these fields, in these forests, something is burning very much. Perhaps some warehouse was destroyed. Information is received about the impact on Balakleya, on the railway station, about some damage, losses are not reported. What succeeded there, what failed? And at the same time, mysterious excerpts continue to arrive, interesting news on the North grouping, which continue to concentrate. And, in general, strikes are already constantly being inflicted on the border. The APU, in turn, is already transferring equipment in columns. This is again the highway from Kiev, a large number of Humvees are going. We don't see armored vehicles with you here. These are passenger Humvees that are able to travel long distances at high speed. It seems to you that the APU does not use rail transport for these movements, as they understand that rail transport will most likely be destroyed. Destroyed as soon as it reaches the target. In general, we see that the situation is extremely difficult. The APU is waiting for help, but most experts agree that there will be no help. It is not enough to stop something here, to change something. And since Russia controls everything, the line of contact, the Dnieper River. Here are the next shots showing the landfill, and where we see with you the concentration of forces, equipment. And this landfill is simply destroyed with the use of rocket weapons. And we are well aware that Ukraine, at least along the line to the Kiev-Odessa clinic, is controlled entirely. Perhaps in western Ukraine there are still some chances to hide something there, everything that is, say, on the left side of this line. And everything on the right, well, everything is visible, everything is shot through, everything is seen, and well, it's difficult. Very difficult. And that's it, dear friends.